Hello and welcome to the Skills Podcast, where we break down DBT skills through the lens of application at work, in relationships, and life in general. My name's Faith, and I'm a former operator and a full-time CEO coach with over 3,000 hours of experience working with rapidly scaling teams and high-achieving founders and leaders. My co-host is Meredith Meyer, a licensed marriage and family therapist who specializes in dialectical behavioral therapy and who's been practicing for over 13 years. In addition, she's a professor at USD's Master Level Clinical and Mental Health Program, supervisor, and a mother of 2 incredible kids, both under 5. Together, we founded the On Point practice to support whole person and whole system health by integrating our 2 superpowers and evidence-based therapies with adjunct approaches to enhance emotional resilience, relational skills, and physical well-being. We work with individuals, couples, families, founders, and organizations who are looking for more effective ways of functioning together as a whole and on an individual level. We believe that by integrating these practices, people can experience an increased quality of life that has a meaningful impact on all levels. And that, we believe, is on point. So, by way of backstory, for almost 12 years, I co-led and scaled a startup in New York City from 0 to 1 through 2 acquisitions, first as the COO and then the CEO before we got acquired for the first time. At our peak, we had about 200 people, just for context. Early on in our scaling, I could clearly see where I was holding myself back and my team back with old behaviors and limiting beliefs, and frankly, just from not knowing any better. I didn't have an MBA. Who was I to be doing this? So I decided to work with a coach and a therapist to get out of my own way and to up-level my skills, which I firmly believe led to one of our strongest inflection points as a company. During the process of going from nothing to millions, I found myself feeling like there were some core life and, I'm using air quotes here, how to human lessons that I had missed growing up, and I flailed around a lot trying to fill those gaps. I got there eventually, but had I known about DBT skills then, I believe I could have thrashed a lot less and driven greater results faster, and with fewer gray hairs in the process. One of my greatest desires as a coach now is to help shorten the learning curve for the leaders I work with, and I'm so excited to bring this podcast to you as what I hope will be an immense resource and tool to help you do just that. So, looking ahead, what you can expect is a deep dive into the DBT skills as the podcast progresses. We'll talk about what each skill is. We'll have conversations around the application of those skills in all areas of your life. And we'll also have occasional episodes where we explore related topics in life and business. So today, before we begin the skills deep dive, Meredith and I are going to kick things off with an exploration of what healthy conflict is. But first, before we get into that, I imagine that this may be the first time that many of you have heard of DBT as a therapeutic approach. So, Mer, if you're game, would you mind taking us through what DBT even is and how it's different from, again with the air quotes, traditional therapy? And in particular, because I imagine we're probably going to have a lot of people with a very healthy bias to action listening to this podcast. When people are looking for a DBT practitioner, what should they look for, or where should they look? Because as I understand it, there's a very specific type of certification that people can look for truly board certified DBT practitioners. Go ahead and take it from here.
All right. Yeah. Great question. So first and foremost, DBT, or dialectical behavior therapy, at its core is a form of cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. So for those who are not familiar with what that means, CBT is an evidence-based practice. So there's a ton of research using CBT for a variety of mental health conditions and just things that people struggle with across the board. And the robust evidence for it makes it like kind of the premier thing that a lot of therapists learn and get trained in and then lead with when people come into their office to start working with them. So at its core, it's really focusing on paying attention to our cognition, so what we're thinking about and how those thoughts influence how we feel, and then our behaviors, what we do with how we're feeling and thinking, and then how does that serve us and how does that not serve us. And in addition to paying attention to thinking about what we can change in our thoughts or in our behaviors, DBT places an emphasis on acceptance work. So finding a balance between pushing ourselves to change with focusing on accepting what we can accept. For a lot of people, this is like a whole new kind of world to step into. I think a lot of times we're really conditioned to just focus on the change. So bringing in acceptance is something that makes it a little bit different. And by focusing on both acceptance and change essentially at the same time, um, that is considered something that is dialectical. So to be dialectical, we're holding two truths that are like seemingly in opposition, but are both equally valid. In addition, I think other things that make DBT a little bit unique, and people will report this, I'm thinking about a couple different clients that I work with, is that there's a big emphasis on values-driven behavior. So instead of just thinking about our behaviors of what works for us or what doesn't work for us, like kind of that binary thinking, when we bring in values work, it gives us a bigger anchor point or kind of like a roadmap of how we want to move ourselves and what is going to serve us best. Hopefully that makes sense. But I think the values work is also something that's unique about DBT. So the second question about like what makes it different than traditional talk therapy, DBT is a pretty structured format. It has principled flexibility, which means there's structure to the sessions and the model in general and like how therapists are trained to deliver it. But we're also flexible. It's not a standardized treatment. It's not rigid. It really meets people where you're at, and it's a very collaborative. So DBT therapists are trained to really show up in the room, to be really interactive with clients. Some traditional talk therapy models, the therapist is meant to be like a blank slate, and DBT is far from that. And as you get to know me, if you hear me talking more, you'll see them very animated. And I try to bring in my own personal examples and things that relate. And I feel like that's something that makes it different also. And then one other kind of clarifying piece is that when people are looking for therapy and they're looking for DBT providers, there's kind of two different buckets that DBT kind of falls into. One is going to look pretty similar to traditional therapy in the sense that you just meet with a provider for one-on-one, what we call DBT informed treatment. So this would be someone that's familiar with DBT, maybe practices it, but doesn't practice the full model, or in this current setting isn't offering the full model. So the full model is a little bit more robust, and we call it comprehensive DBT. And that's also unique to the model, is that it's delivered in 4 different parts. So we have individual therapy. Clients will work with their therapist usually once a week, kind of standard, and then depending on what they're working on, that frequency can change. And then they will join a DBT skills training group. So again, for the full model, someone would be doing all these different components. So the therapy, the skills training. So this is where we teach mindfulness, interpersonal effectiveness skills, distress tolerance, emotion regulation. And the idea is that people have this specific carved out time where they're just learning skills. And kind of the framing in DBT, we look at a lot of problems that people have as a skills deficit. So the idea is if we can get people in group, they can learn these skills and then bring those skills into the therapy room. One, the therapy room doesn't have to spend the time teaching the skills, so you already have that somewhere else. And then it's this beautiful blend of like doing like deeper kind of work, deeper inquiry with this new set of skills that you can apply to your life's problems. So the combination there is really powerful. And then the third component in a comprehensive program would be that the client has access to their therapist for phone coaching in between sessions. This is really, as you can imagine, lovely for people who need additional support, who want that kind of coach feel of like, hey, I know I'm not seeing you till next week, but this thing's coming up. I need some help. What should I do? Or what skills could I pull on? And then last but not least, the fourth component is actually for the therapists themselves. So therapists delivering comprehensive DBT will sit on a treatment team. And they meet once a week to discuss cases, to help keep themselves well and up to date with what's going on and resourced. I think the DBT treatment team is so invaluable, and that's the fourth and final component. So I say that all to say two different modes. There's two different things that people can be looking for. The easiest way to find a certified DBT LBC clinician is to go to their website, which is dbt-lbc.org. And they have a list where you can search your zip code and find certified providers in your area. And then outside, and that's great for comprehensive. That's also great for DBT informed work too, depending on what people need. And then the other thing is when you're looking for therapists, like if you go to Psychology Today and you type in DBT, you might find a lot of providers. And when you go into your consult calls, there's some great questions that you can ask them, like how have they been trained in DBT? How long have they been practicing it? Do they sit on a consultation team? Do they provide comprehensive DBT? And you'll get a sense like right away of how people answer those questions to see the range of training and different experiences that therapists can have. So trying to like hone in on the expert in the field or someone who has like really well versed in DBT, they most likely will be able to answer those questions like pretty easily and describe what their training process is like, and how they deliver DBT may be different than how it was originally designed in that comprehensive model. Yeah, and so I'll come up with a little graphic and maybe we can post this here so we can show that while I'm talking. But great questions.
Thank you for humoring me. I think this is super helpful information. Part of the reason why we are here having this conversation is because, as anybody who's listening can imagine, when you're running a company, you often hear from any leader that the bulk of the exhausting work comes down to the people stuff. It's not always the actual hard skills that drains you the most. It's inevitably some sort of interpersonal conflict will arise. And sometimes we realize we just don't have the skills yet. We don't have a muscle there yet to even have the first guess at how to engage with that conflict or that discomfort that's arising out of that relationship in a healthy and productive way. So a very general and broad question as a launch point, and we'll take it where we can, and then we'll pick it back up if need be, is could you take a stab at explaining what healthy conflict even is or what it even looks like?
Defining conflict, or just even thinking about, if we just take even the word healthy out and just kind of look at like, well, what is conflict? I think of it as a pattern of behavior that's occurring between two people, or in a group setting might be occurring from like affecting the whole system. So it's not just like a single act or a single thing that occurred, but more of like the sequence of events that unfolds that creates this feeling or creates this tension, and that can be experienced by both people or all the people that are involved. And that's more of like that's the transaction piece of it, or the transactional model, if you will. So person A does something and says something, and person B registers it a certain way and then responds, and how they respond is going to influence person A. And then we're off and running. So we have this little cycle that we can then get set forth.
I love it. Okay. I love this definition, because what I think you're calling out here about conflict is just, it's all behavior, right? It's just how we interact with each other.
Yes.
So thank you for that. Please keep going. The cycle, the dance begins, right? Each person dance steps.
Yes, exactly. Something happened that now is setting off like an emotional response, or it's increasing our emotional arousal. For a lot of people, when we think about conflict, we go right to anger. Like I think about like, oh yeah, conflict is like this very like anger based, or like fueled by anger, emotional response. If we just use that and think about where that anger came from, it started from somewhere. So that there's a little ping, something happens, and now I have this response to it. And then when I'm in that place of feeling angry or just having any, like when our emotions are higher, the way I like to think about it is like when our emotions are high or we're feeling activated, kind of shuts down our typical thinking like faculties or like how we typically go about thinking about things. It's more like one of the functions of emotions, right? Like when we have a strong emotional response to something, is that it can bypass the thinking process. Like I don't have to think about if I was walking across the street and all of a sudden a car comes like zooming down the street, I just freeze and I step back to not get hit. I don't have to think about, oh my gosh, there's a really fast car coming my way. What do I do with this? Right? Like,
what do I do?
One of the functions of emotions is that it can bypass that thinking process. And it saves us time, and that's like super functional. But in moments of conflict, what that can do is create a lot more conflict.
Yes.
Right. So I'm not thinking about it, I'm not slowing down and kind of unpacking what's happening in that moment. I'm just reacting to it. So maybe I get defensive, or maybe I go to really problem solve something really quickly that then creates more problems. Or I shut down or withdraw. So we all have like different responses to it. Whatever that ping was, whatever the prompting event was. But that's usually one of the first steps in the conflict cycle.
Okay. So I think I'm glad you started there with just establishing what even conflict is, right? Because if I can pull a Brene Brown here, she calls her podcast like the pause cast, because she's always like, wait, I want to make sure I get this, which I love.
So good.
Right. What I love about what you just shared, right, is that when we do think about conflict, largely we're anchored on the emotion of anger, which we know that anger a lot of the times is like an iceberg, right? The anger is what we could see above the water, but what's really happening is there's something else below the anger that's a lot tougher to dance with sometimes. But I like that you called out that it's largely anger that we think about. But that's not always it. Is that what you're suggesting? Is that conflict isn't always about being angry. It's about feeling that ping and feeling something a certain kind of way about something that just doesn't feel right in the interpersonal dynamic. Is that what you were suggesting with that?
Yeah. So that like initial ping, like you're so right. Like, so the anger iceberg in the DBT world, or like when I talk about emotions with people, like anger is like most commonly what we call like a secondary emotion. So it usually it's usually actually like a kind of a learned or shaped response to something else. So maybe that initial ping, maybe I'm thinking about like in a work setting, right? Someone says something that's maybe like questioning what I just did or what I just said.
Yeah.
And maybe that brings up, maybe the ping was I felt some like a shame response. Or maybe I did something wrong and I'm feeling guilty. Or maybe I'm like disappointed that the person just called me out that way, or I'm sad that they spoke to me the way they did. I see this a lot in like, in working relationships. I'm thinking about a couple that I work with that also runs a business together. And they're just set up for these moments when they have to kind of go into their work hat and give that direct feedback. But outside of that work hat, they wouldn't want their partner to speak to them in some way, or like they want them to lead with more empathy. But they're like trying to get things done, or they're in a board meeting, or whatever it may be. So that initial ping is like, oh, I'm feeling really like disappointed that this is happening right now. Or like jealousy is a common one, or envy. Oh, you just had this really luxurious lunch break, and now you're coming into the room like all refreshed and you have all these ideas, and that's different than what I have right now. That must be nice to have all that time.
Yeah.
Right, to yourself.
Resentment a little
bit. Resentment, yes.
Yeah.
So that primary emotion, and going back to Brene Brown, I think she does a really good job at describing this, of those emotions. Like if I'm going to tell you that right now, like the way you just looked at me made me feel uncomfortable. Or I'm feeling like I'm like kind of curious about like what's happening for you right now, like what that look was all about. that is much more vulnerable because I'm exposing that to you that, oh, yes, I'm capable of feeling disappointed. I'm capable of feeling uncertainty, or I'm unsure, or I'm feeling shame about something. Versus if I just lead with anger, it's much less vulnerable.
Yeah.
Like if I just start acting, kind of lashing out at you because you looked at me a certain way, we don't have to talk about those other feelings, right? Like now we're just focused on the anger.
Totally.
Now we can just get in a little battle back and forth and we're off and running.
Totally.
So in some ways, a lot of times I feel like anger can serve the function of like it's oftentimes protective, or it feels safer in a way. It's less vulnerable. But again, the trickle down effects is that now what you're receiving, if you and I are in the dance right now, you're receiving my anger, which is an inaccurate expression of what I'm actually feeling. So if I was, okay, let me land on one example to stick with. If I was feeling hurt, but instead I just used the anger or showed you anger, all you're receiving is my anger.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then so you don't even know what's happening. Yeah.
All of a sudden,
yeah.
What did I do?
F you.
Right? Exactly.
Oh, you're
right.
angry now? We can both get angry.
Totally. Right. And then it's like,
yeah,
just the dance again continues, and the dance can either go down that path of on the surface, like this kind of reactivity, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Or a dance that could potentially go down the more vulnerable path, which is I trust you enough, or I trust this relationship enough to show you what's actually going on with me, which is I actually felt really hurt when you looked at me like that just now. Like, what was that? Like, can you help me understand what just happened? Or, something like that.
Yeah.
Interesting. And then those two paths can lead to very different
outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So initially, I think when I painted the picture, I used the term like accurate expression.
Yeah.
So like accurate expression of emotion, or accurately expressing what's going on for you. And then that second example is, we would say, is an inaccurate expression. So I'm inaccurately expressing myself to you, which then sets you up to then further invalidate me or misunderstand me. And it's usually not happen. It usually just happens automatically, right? But I'm feeding you information that's, again, not accurate. So even if you try to validate it, you might be missing the mark, or you might be creating more of a vicious cycle because you didn't have the appropriate information to start with. Does that make sense?
Totally.
So I love this framing because we're constantly in transaction with each other. So what I love about that is that both parties can be responsible for doing something different.
Yeah.
Right. So if someone can pick up on like, ooh, Lisa usually doesn't really talk that way. She's like really angry right now. Like, I'm curious. Can I be curious about that, or what's happening? How do I want to respond to her versus like picking up the anger and just kind of going to bat with it? Or for Lisa, whatever happened for her, if the person is responding to her in a way that's like feeling more invalidating, or is like feels more conflict based, that could be her cue. Like, what's happening? Wait, what's happening here? Let me rewind the tape. Can I do something different? Or how do I respond? Oh, I know I led with that anger, but really what's coming up for me is I'm feeling really disappointed, or I'm feeling really unsure about this thing now that I was really sure about before.
Love that. Yeah.
Does that make sense, or does that framing of it work?
I think it really resonates because, especially if you're applying this to the world of business or in a workspace, right? Which is the lens I'm looking at this through with you. I think it almost makes it easier because you have agreed upon roles within your workspace, right? And so if you think about the role that you play within the team to help move the company forward, right? I think it's a pretty easy parallel to go, oh, interesting. Yeah. So there's a role that I play where I transact in any relationship, and there's my piece of the transaction and there's the other person's piece of the transaction, right? And ultimately how we engage with each other will inform what comes out of that transaction, whether it's like a net positive, net negative, who knows, neutral.
Yeah.
I think it's a great launch point. And what a lot of people come to coaching for, and what I love about DBT as well, is they're always looking for tools, right? Because a lot of the times, coming back to the very first thing we were talking about of like just maybe not having a skill yet, I find that if we can start with the foundation of something, which usually is just self-awareness, right? Then
it's very helpful.
You're able, exactly. Then you're often able to build on that by setting each layer of the foundation one piece at a time. So I actually think this is perfect that we're just starting here today with just what conflict even is and just understanding like that dynamic within a relationship. Personally, in case this is useful to anyone who's listening, one of the things that I did, and I will be totally transparent about this, is there are two resources that I really loved. One was the feelings wheel. It's a wheel, and apparently the large majority of the population, like if you think of the movie Inside Out, right? The majority of the population, the human population, is really good at identifying 7 core emotions, right? Some of which Meredith listed earlier, right? It's like anger, fear, happiness, disgust, joy, that kind of stuff, right? I noticed that for myself, when I looked at the feelings wheel, I'm not going to share my screen right now. We'll pull it up and add it in so you guys can see it full screen. It doesn't mess with our video. The feelings wheel is it's a series of concentric rings, and in the center are those core 7 emotions. And then from there, it gets more discrete. It breaks it out into the more nuanced versions of that emotion. And then there's one final outer ring, which is the super nuanced versions of that emotion. And what's I found was super useful about this was that I could sit there, look at that wheel. And the part that I said I'd be totally transparent about is that I printed the feelings wheel and I had it up in my office. I had it up in my bedroom on like my nightstand. And then I also had it in the restroom because you're a captive audience and you're just sitting there thinking for a second, like
great
kind of a great
for,
place to put it, right?
Great place for personal work.
Totally, right? Deep commitment to the personal work. So one thing was the feelings wheel. And I noticed that I could just look at it and say, you know what? I'm actually not that familiar with what the felt sensation of embarrassment is in my body. I think I know, but I'd love to grow my awareness of what that actually feels like more. So I would just pick an emotion, or disappointment. That was a tough one for me to really admit when I was really, truly just disappointed, not angry, right? And I was able to pick an emotion, grow my awareness around it, and be like, oh, okay, now I can discern between what's disappointment versus what's sadness, or what's anger, something like that. So that was the first one. The second one was the Center for Nonviolent Communication has a needs inventory. And that was the thing that I was able to launch with, where it starts with, we'll share the links for this and I'll show it on screen too. But it gives you like high level categories of needs. And then the more nuanced versions of the needs underneath that, like a sense of trust or safety or connection, something like that. I had those 2 things printed out for myself, multiple locations as we've established. And I just tried to really grow my fluency there with the understanding that if I could be more aware of what emotion was actually coming up for me, and I could be more aware of what need was coming up for me that wasn't being met, then I could engage with any sort of conflict that was coming up for me in a much more productive way, because I could then ask for something from the other person.
And all of that, what you're describing, would be in the accurate expression umbrella.
Awesome.
Right? Like you're more clearly defining it and then describing it to someone, which is going to land differently than just coming from like a reactive or like kind of retaliatory place that then sets off the vicious cycle.
Very cool. So now handing it over to the professional when it comes to the clinical skills here. What would you recommend or is there a resource that you would recommend, whether it's like the feelings wheel or the needs inventory or some other launch point that people can use to start to build their awareness around being able to express themselves more accurately?
That's a good question. And I do like what you described. I think those would be like helpful because I think the more we understand about our own process and then being able to articulate it to someone else is really powerful. Like that alone's a life skill. It can be so helpful in all our domains. Um, what I was thinking about when you're sharing what you're describing is that, a lot of times, and maybe you see this in the coaching world too, like couples, let's say, don't come to me because they just experienced their first conflict. Has yet to happen. They usually are coming to me because they have been in a pattern of conflict and are having a really difficult time shifting out of it, or it's become now the new norm is that conflict. And so I would imagine probably like in the kind of leadership world is that your team develops patterns of interactions. So there's something that's happening for you, like your own internal experience, and then what's happening for the whole team. And then if you can identify a pattern, that's actually a really one lovely thing and a great starting point. So if we can say, every time we sit down to discuss this thing, or every time we get close to this deadline, this happens. Now we're beginning to see the transaction and be curious about that. Like, well, what's happening there? So then points of entry can be, what's my experience of that? What can I do differently? Other points of entry can be trying to get to understand someone else's experience or some other people's like roles in that. And even just describing it. So describing it would be non-judgmental language. Like really like behaviorally specific, like I said this, they said that. I noticed a shift in their posture. I noticed, here was the words that they said, here was the outcome, whatever it may be, but can we describe it as concretely as possible? And then going back to where we started is like, where's the ping? Like, where was that starting point? So a lot of times what I love, and I do this with myself, I do this with individuals, with couples, families, whatever, is if we can find that ping. Let's say you and I just had some conflict, I don't know, like last night, and we're going to use that as an example to kind of comb through and really try to define and see what happened. Even if we're just staying with that one example, it's so incredibly useful because what happened there is probably similar to what happened before or what happened in another time. It may be different contexts, but a lot of times like the things that ping us or that we feel really like that kind of hook us and activate us, there tends to be like frequent flyers. Right? So if I can try to unpack this one most recent example, it's actually really helpful for understanding all the other examples. So I think an inroad sometimes I feel like it can feel really overwhelming. Of like, there is dysfunction all over the place. Like, where do we even start? And I'm like, just start with one. Like, let's just pull out this one thing. Can I understand it? And then the follow-up with that is like, what becomes accessible to work with? So going back to like, your ideas are great. But I think there's even a lot of power in just like trying to like describe things out. What's happening for me, what's happening for the other person.
Totally. And I think in the absence of maybe a felt sense of safety in that relationship to try to engage with the other person yet, I imagine that even if somebody was able to talk to someone that they trust about it, whether it's their coach or their therapist or their journal or someone else who's in their life, just like what you're saying, just to be able to talk it through and to just try to explain what it is that they're noticing. A tip we always use at the groups that I work with, Meyer Method, is that we tell people, imagine as if there was a video camera that was recording what happened, and you're just describing what happened that you see on the screen, right? It's not about you did this thing and da-da-da-da, like you're reading that person's mind. We're not mind readers. We can't do that. If you stay focused on the behavior, you looked at me a certain way and I felt, right? Or the way you were describing it. I just want to underline that because I think it's super helpful to get that in your head of like, just notice the behavior, right? Because then I think we also help, like Brene Brown says, we stay away from triggering the shame of the thing, right? Where you start interpreting the person as bad versus the behavior as the thing that is something to work on. So I know you have a session coming up, so I think this is a good place maybe for us to wrap up for today. But...
Yeah. I was just going to say there's obviously a lot more, a lot more tools that we can definitely come back to and kind of build off of this.
Exactly. But for now, this is a good starting point. We'll link to some resources and show them where appropriate. And
great.
If you have any questions, hit us up. We are here for it. And thank you so much. This was so fun.
Thank you so much for joining us for our very first episode of the Skills Podcast. If you like this episode, please share, follow us on your podcast app, check us out on social at The Skills Podcast, or check us out at our website at theonpointpractice.com. Thanks so much. We'll catch you next time.